Deathworlders to the Extreme by Aqua Star Dark. Chapter 10 Collapse. Summary. The result of the collapse. The moment Hitoshi saw the tree breaking, he acted before he could think. There wasn't any logic to it. If he had time to apply some, he'd probably imagine that the ship that had more or less survived crash landing on a planet could survive a hit from a giant tree weighed down by the ship's wing. But Hitoshi didn't have the time to think, as the signs of the tree's collapse built up, and instead he could only move. He ignored the pain in his ankle and the splinters in his palm as he raced down the tree, ignored the cat alien's obvious horror at his thunderous approach. He was so lucky he didn't die on the spot, and ignored the ripples of force that flew down his arms as he attacked the hatch with everything he had. The first shot was more than a surprise. He was lucky its aim was like a stormtrooper's, but he dodged every one of them after. Sure, he could have taken them head-on like he did on the kidnapper ship, but since this was a different alien with different weapons, then he didn't doubt that this kind of tranquilizer would have some sort of effect on him. The good thing was the cat alien didn't die when he saw him break into the ship. The bad thing was that he had no idea he was rescuing it, likely a side effect of Hitoshi running on it like a madman. Whoops! Fortunately, the cat alien was surprisingly light, and Hitoshi was able to lift it up with no trouble. With the exception of it clawing at him, biting him, and trying to suffocate him with a cloth that made his face feel numb and also seemed to attach to it. Unfortunately, that happened to be the moment when the tree finally decided to snap. He was barely out of the ship, and he knew that by running, he would only get himself and the cat alien crushed and or injured by any debris, and so he made a decision. Praying to Kami that his plan would work, Hitoshi flung the cat alien with all his might and lunged back into the confines of the pod, in the center where he might have a chance of things crumbling around him if it might happen to break. And break it did. Maybe it was the already extensive damage or the combined weight of the tree and the wing, or maybe a combination of the two reasons, but for what reason why, the entire ship collapsed under the falling tree, and all Hitoshi could do was curl up in a ball and huddle against the metal wall as everything broke and fell around him, leaving him in darkness and dust. Shota whimpered, not for the agony that raced through his body or the stress of the scenario, no, but for the memories that flung themselves to the forefront of his mind as his eyes met the curled form of the Deathworlder that had saved him from the deadly fate it had traded itself for. The painful memories were old from his youth as a hero in training, from an internship that perhaps he never truly recovered from. He and one of his best friends, a Klo by the name of Shirakumo Oboro, had gone on an internship together to a trading asteroid to help out as peacekeepers. It was a peaceful place, full of shops and younglings like themselves, that instead of training for their future, were exploring the galaxy. But it wasn't peaceful for long. Halfway through their internship, rogue ships from a war too far away to be any of danger to the asteroid rolled into the port, blowing up anything and anyone they could find. He and Oboro had been assigned to help with the evacuation and anyone they could find. He and Oboro had been assigned to help with the evacuation, and they were well near the end of their internship by the time the rogues were captured, and so they decided to return to their ships. That's what Shota regretted the most. The thing about having rogues in a spaceport is they don't like to leave things as they are. Due to Oboro coming from an oxygen-rich planet, he needed to wear a suit that would supply what oxygen he lacked in the surrounding air. But since they have the option of customizing their own ships, he added extra features to increase the overall oxygen of his ship. Shota decided to do the same for his ship, as his species could handle most levels of oxygen due to their poison resistance, and so that Oboro would feel comfortable whenever they were assigned to switch ships. Like what they'd been told to do on that terrible day. Between the rogues messing with the features and increasing oxygen, the friction of the hat opening was more than enough to start a chain reaction throughout his ship. Oberon's melting face, filled with horror and pain as Shota's ship collapsed around his body. Shota saw dreams for years, and here he saw it again as he lay in agony on the ground of the wreckage site, eyes shut against the dust that swirled around him. Oberon and the Deathworlder's face melded together in his mind, and the whine that escaped Shota was well warranted as the old memories clung to the new ones in a taunting agony. It should have been me. It should have been me. It should have been me. Were the words that his were the words that his subconscious chanted as Shota helplessly tried to take back control of his own mind. This is an emergency. I have to do something. He tried to yell at his mind, to no avail. The Deathworlder was a creature that he and the others had been sent to capture, not to protect, after all. It was clearly dangerous and unafraid to kill, and yet after it saved him, Shota didn't know what to think. Somehow it was a reminder that the Deathworlder had purposely saved him despite not even knowing him. Despite the fact that he'd actively attacked it, that snapped Shota out of his panic and daze, he forced himself up despite being stunned to the core by the situation. It saved me. Maybe it was by accident and it was going to drag him away to eat later, but it saved me. Maybe it was an accident. It was really going to drag him away to eat later, but did it save me on purpose? Thought Shota, bewildered. He knew too little about the Deathworlder to come to any real conclusion, but the fact that what had just occurred it sent everything Shota thought he knew in disarray. And the Vemu couldn't help but allow the slightest hint of an impossible question that drifted through his mind. Is it possible that the Deathworlder is sentient? It was ridiculous. No sentient regular being would sacrifice itself for another unless trained or part of a pack. And even though it was dubious, that could even happen with the exception of rare cases. Though, considering he knew nothing about the Deathworlder species, and likely would consider it just, Shota shook his head to avoid incapacitating himself again with another panic attack. What was done, and he couldn't do anything about what the Deathworlder has chosen to do, or its death. Shota pawed at the ground. Without supplies and protection of my ship, I'll doubt I'll survive long either. I used up all those darts trying to hit the Deathworlder too. It looked like he would end up dying. It looked like he would end up dying the slow way. Fitting in for someone who had so many die in place of him. Fitting in for someone who had so many die in place of him. Ah! It was just as darkness of his mind reared its head again that he heard the cry. A cry like an injured cub calling for its mother. Shota froze as the cry echoed once more from the wreckage, this time accompanied by the rush-breathing whimpers of a frightened creature. The settling dust gave Shota just enough vision to reach the side of the wreckage, and there it was, frightened, stressed, and very likely injured, yet alive, with Deathworlder trapped within the crumbled confines of Shota's ship. Shota nearly collapsed in on himself in the wave of relief that overcame him. So it hadn't died protecting him. That was nice to know. No, but he resisted the urge in favor of letting his rescue training kick in. It was unlikely that the Deathworlder was sentient, but it was likely smart enough to figure out any instructions Shota would give if he treated it like a stressed sentient that didn't know a speaking tongue and came from an entirely different culture as well. Though Shota could barely see it, it was trapped behind multiple layers of debris after all. He could hear it and didn't doubt it could hear him as well, which meant he could go through the first thing he was taught to do when rescuing. Calm his target down. The Deathworlder was obviously stressed. Its gasping breath and barely contained whimpers were a sign of its distress, unless it were sure signs of its distress. Unless it were to calm down, it was unlikely Shota would be able to do anything to coax it into a position where it would be able to help it get free. As a predator, Vimus, like Shota, were often intimidating to other species, which meant that Shota didn't have much experience calming anyone or anything down, as he was often asked to let other creatures take the lead with such a role. But as he was the only creature around to try to calm the Deathworlder, he did the one thing that his species instinctually did in the situation. In such a situation, he cooed. There was a panicking, likely adult Deathworlder in the broken remains of his ship, and he was cooing at it like it was a slagging cub. Had he really gone insane, hadn't he? All the sounds from the Deathworlder were silenced as it turned its body towards his and stared with an eye through the crack. Shota shuddered at the ring of color that concentrated on his eyes. What was this creature in eye contact? Yet he continued to coo at the Deathworlder and reached between the cracks of the wreckage with his scarf to nestle right at the opening where the Deathworlder stuck its face. Please don't eat my scarf. Please don't eat it. The measured, gasping breath began anew, and Shota felt small appendages brushing against the scarf. He kept his scarf still. In a moment, it was snatched up by the Deathworlder and rubbed against the creature's face. It was getting its scent all over his scarf. He could feel it, although that wasn't exactly what he had planned for his scarf. Holding it seemed to abate the tension in the Deathworlder's body, and it reached a hand through the hole in which Shota struck his scarf. It was odd, seeing such a dangerous appendage up close. Its seemingly hairless hands, in truth having light scattered traces of fur throughout the end of each hovering appendage, were something like half-grown claws. The claws were peculiar. Just pretend I said that right. To say the least, they took up the entire top of one part of each appendage, yet barely reached beyond the skin. How could its claws be any use like that? How could its claws be any use like this? He wondered, gently patting a paw on the hand. Unless it's not fully grown yet. Shota could feel his ears flop at the concept. If the Deathworlder was a cub, then it meant that it had been taken from its home and caretakers. Most likely, it also meant that for all the destruction it caused, Deathworlder wasn't even fully grown. We never did think about how old it was. We just assumed it was fully grown. If it really was smarter than they thought, or perhaps even sentient, that meant it had likely been following its instincts and staying around the nearest adult when it found Shota. Meaning Shota was the closest adult for it to rely on if the Deathworlder was really a cub. You've really been through a lot, haven't you? The Deathworlder chatted measurably in reply. Maybe words? Don't be silly. Deathworlders are called that because nothing sentient can develop there. Chuffed the part of his mind thoroughly trained for heroics. We've never encountered sentient life on this planet before. First are possible, replied the logical part of his mind. Ignoring his mind argument, Shota began to search for a way the Deathworlder to get out of the wreck of its trap it found itself in. That's the end of chapter 10. We're on to chapter 11 now. Chapter 11. Reaching Out. Summary. Shinzo is trapped, and Aizawa tries to help. Dust coated Hitoshi's face and body in an irritating dry paint that sent shivers of irritation down Hitoshi's spine for every moment that passed. His body was still somewhat curled up, though he had fallen on his side during the collapse. He had some wiggle room, but was completely trapped by the debris which caused a cage around his body that offered an opening that was barely wide enough for him to stick his arm through. Maybe his head if he tried, but definitely not his entire body. Hitoshi blinked against the haze and cried out when suddenly he felt something very sharp and very much not dust or an eyelash land on his eye. Did a silver of metal get in my eye? Shota cried out. Hitoshi cried out again as he tried to get out of his eye, only to blink as his breathing became more erratic and whimpers sprouted from his throat. If only he had some water, but he didn't. And couldn't get some from his pack because he left it and his staff behind when he ran to save the cat alien. He was stuck, and if he tried to push himself out, the chances are he would take everything collapse and could make everything collapse into it himself. And oh, Kami, I really am stuck here, aren't I? Oh, Kami, I really am stuck here, aren't I? He grasped at his eyes. He picked out the silver in a painfully horrified process. At least I had a chance when I could move around, but now? Hitoshi froze at the sound of the cat trilling, a sound often used by stray cats to call him over to feed them. What is that sound? Hitoshi turned towards the crack to find the cat alien from earlier look at him and trilling gently as its red eyes flitted over his body. It came back for me. It came back for me, thought Hitoshi as his eyes trailed over its form. So close and not in a rush like earlier. Hitoshi could definitely see the cat alien much better, and what it looked like, it was tall and definitely cat, with black fur and red eyes, and a scarf that seemed to be attached to his body. A few bright yellow lines cut through the fur around each eye like a vertical shuttle glasses. It wore a black jumpsuit of some sort, and one of its arms was tied up in a white sling. Its tail swung absently behind its body. The cat alien trailed again behind its body. The cat alien trilled again as its scarf unfurled from around its neck and trailed between the crack to nestle in front of Hitoshi. He brushed it gently so he wouldn't scare the cat alien before pressing it to his face and wiping away the unaccumulated dust and tears. Water would be nice, but this works. Hitoshi reached a hand out to out the crack to point at his pack, only for the cat alien to start patting it like its hand was a puppy. You know what? I've been touch charged for way too long. Sure. Suddenly, the cat alien's ears drooped before it began to say something to Hitoshi in some language used by kidnappers. You using the same language as by kidnappers is just a coincidence, right? Or some sort of universal language? He asked. The cat alien didn't reply as it started to look over his prison. I hope so. I love cats, and you're basically a cat, you know? The cat alien left his field of vision, though Hitoshi could hear it creeping on the outside. Maybe there's something that could help me in the rubble here? Hitoshi shuffled in place, holding the tip of the cat alien scarf close for comfort as he looked over the rubble surrounding him. There wasn't much discernible aside from the twisted rubble, but there was one portion of what was once a wall that seemed to have some sort of cabinet. It was partially blocked by a shovel of metal that Hitoshi was easily able to slide aside, giving him access to the mysterious cabinet. The deathworlder seemed comforted by the presence of his scarf. So Shoda didn't retract it as he prowled the edges of the rack in search of any escape routes for the deathworlder. His arm still ached and sent pangs of pain through his body, but at the very least it didn't incapacitate him like earlier. He deftly avoided the tree where it lay across from was once the front of the ship, and made sure to step over any piece of rubble that might destabilize the ship. It was odd, Shota realized after a few clicks, how looking back it was obvious that the Deathworlder was sentient, and the clothing it wore even suggesting sapience, though the HPSC also denied such a concept's possibility. As Deathworlders are places too dangerous for us to even explore, we can easily understand that any creature living there would be unable to build a civilization, let alone think about and feel anything due to the overwhelming stress that survival on its own would put on them, said one of Shota's instructors for even when he was training to be a hero, and that was something every one of his instructors had said afterwards in regard to a potential death world and sentience and sapience. Too dangerous to explore, huh? Too dan- no. Too dangerous, too dangerous to explore, huh? Thought Shota as he looked closely at the promising piece of leaning metal. Meaning no exploration was done at all, really. Meaning most of the facts about Death World might have just been an assumption based on experience on non-Death Worlds then. That so-called that so-called science was really a scam then. And it took actually interacting with a Death Worlder to find out. You haven't even You haven't even interacted with it yet in a situation where neither of you held power over the other. Nitpicked his mind. It might just be waiting for a chance to rip your throat out. Shut it, Shota replied, nudging the metal with a claw. Clank! Shota jolted, sending a pain of agony through his arm and forcing him to curl in on himself to wait it out. After a couple of ticks, he was able to uncurl as the sound of shifting metal resonated from within the pod. He tugged at his scarf as he let past rubble and circled around the crack to see where he'd seen the Death Worlder, only to freeze in shock when he saw what was being tossed at the opening. Water packets, jelly packets, and the compressed meals were some of the items that the Death Worlder flung to the ground, chattering as he did so. How did you even... Shota muttered, scooping the food into a pile a little away from the unsaleable piece of wreckage. If it can recognize these containers are edible and need to be saved, I can't deny it any longer, can I? If it's smart enough to realize that, then it has to not only be sentient, but sapient as well. Thought Shota as he helped the Death Worlder remove the precious edibles. It having the compassion to save me suggests sentience, and it being able to figure out meal packets alien to suggests it's sapient. Suggests sapience. Unless it's just a sentient that recognized the meal packets from what was on its escape pod. Though, the thought the scientist in Shota's mind. After a click or two, all the metal packets had been tossed outside the crack, and the Death Worlder looked up at him with its small, creepy eyes. I thought it... Why am I southern now? I thought that it was all destroyed. Heh. Good job, you weird little Death Worlder. Weird little Death Worlder. You just gave me a chance of survival. He purred to it to the voice of his pleasure, and the Death Worlder perked up. Except it evidently wasn't happy as it bared its teeth at him with full eye contact engaged. Stumbling back with a complete change in personality, Shota landed on his tail and pulled back his scarf with a snap, gasping heavily. What did I do? I thought it was okay with me. Is it because I moved the food? Does it want it back? The Death Worlder chattered at him, the fur just above its eyes narrowing down as it stared at him. It wasn't baring its teeth anymore, but as its chatter developed into broken breaks that ordered a line, Shota began to realize that he just made it even less happy. Was it playing with me and got upset I reacted so defensively? Experimentally, Shota tossed the meal packets to the Death Worlder. It stared at him, then the meal packet, then slowly lifted the meal packet to its teeth. Wait, no, you're not supposed to eat the wrapping. The Death Worlder tore the wrapping. The metal meant to withstand the impact of the ship crash landing with its teeth and stared at him as it ate, watching as he gaped in frozen shock. You, Shota pointedly stated to the Death Worlder, are a problem child. Understand? You will not be leaving my sight. You are a problem child. Understand? You will not be leaving my sight. It only stuck out its tongue at him with bared. Why? Do Death Worlder cubs threaten each other for fun? Is this what it is? Why? Do Death Worlder's cubs threaten each other for fun? Is this what this is? Why? The Death Worlder continued to eat the meal packet as showed a search for a way for it to get free. Though his search proved fruitful, as the only part stable or unstable enough for the Death World to come through was the crack. The crack, which was not large enough for the Death Worlder to come through.